Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
I had been dreading it for weeks, and as soon as I pulled up to the driveway, the knot in my stomach tightened. It wasn't like I hadn't done this before, but this time, the air felt different. My name is Isabella Marsh, and I was 32 years old. I worked in tech, building software that made logistics more efficient. I was proud of my job, even if it wasn't exactly what my family had envisioned for me. As I parked my old sedan next to my dad's gleaming black BMW and Paul's new Mercedes, I couldn't help but feel out of place. My family always dressed in these meticulously tailored suits, their lives polished and perfect. And then there was me, wearing my standard black jeans and a simple blouse. Nothing fancy. I didn't belong in their world, and they made sure I knew it. The hostess gave me a once-over as I walked into the restaurant, eyes narrowing, her smile just a little too tight. "Table for Marsh?" she asked, her tone polite but unwelcoming. She probably assumed I was lost, not someone who belonged at a table in this upscale place. "Yes, I'm here for the Marsh family," I said, forcing a smile as I followed her to the back of the restaurant. It was the same every time, a monthly family dinner that felt more like a performance than an actual gathering. When I reached the table, everyone was already seated. My father, the patriarch, had his usual scowl on, glancing up as I arrived. His eyes quickly flicked down to my outfit before he let out an exaggerated sigh. My older brother, Paul, flashed me a smirk from across the table. I could already feel the judgment simmering in the air, even before a word was spoken. I sat down, trying to ignore the icy stares. "Is this really how you're going to dress, Isabella?" my dad asked, barely looking at me as he fiddled with his silverware. His voice was coated with disappointment, like it had been rehearsed. "A casual dinner, sure, but this is supposed to be an important evening. Don't you want to at least pretend like you care about making a good impression?" I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. I knew better than to engage. My brother, Paul, chimed in with his signature sarcasm. "Honestly, I can't even believe you're still doing that tech job. How does working with computers even qualify as real work?" He didn't look up from his menu as he spoke. It'd be nice if you could just settle down like a normal person, get a house, maybe have kids, the usual life milestones." His words hit like a punch to the gut. I could already feel the blood rush to my face. The life he considered normal wasn't for me, but I couldn't explain that to him, not without getting mocked further. "Let me guess," Paul continued. "You're still renting that tiny apartment of yours, right? I mean, we can't all just live in our parents' shadow, but at least get a place you're proud of." I stared at my plate, my hands clenching under the table. This wasn't new. They'd always treated my career as a joke. Working in tech wasn't a real job to them. And as for my living situation, I could feel my father's gaze on me, practically daring me to confirm Paul's point. I hadn't bought a house, and I wasn't married. By their standards, I was a failure. But the comments didn't stop there. My dad's voice broke through the uncomfortable silence. "Paul's running a company, he's taking responsibility, doing things the right way. You, on the other hand, working in computers, in a field that doesn't even exist in the real world. You've got no assets, no future. I just don't get why you can't think a little more practically." His words were sharp like a blade that had been used too many times before. I felt my throat close as I fought back the sting behind my eyes. I wasn't sure why I still came to these dinners, why I kept trying to fit into a family that didn't understand me. As I opened my mouth to respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket, cutting the tension. I quickly glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, but something about the timing felt like it was meant to interrupt. Without thinking, I answered the call. "Is this Isabella Marsh?" a voice on the other end asked. I nodded, still trying to collect myself. "Yes, this is she. We're calling from TECH Innovators Weekly. We wanted to let you know that your company, Neosys Logistics, has been selected to be featured on the cover of our next issue." The words hung in the air for a moment, and I could feel the weight of them. I hadn't shared much about Neosys with my family. They wouldn't understand. But now, here it was. The confirmation that my quiet success was finally being recognized. Neosys, a logistics startup I had founded years ago, had just been chosen for the cover story of a leading tech magazine. I took a breath, my voice steady despite the tremor running through me. "Thank you, that's incredible." The voice on the other end continued, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. "We'll be sending over the details soon. We're looking forward to sharing your story with the world. You're doing great things, Isabella." My eyes flicked up to my family. They were all staring at me now. The looks on their faces, confusion, disbelief, told me everything I needed to know. I ended the call, feeling the weight of their stares. The air was thick with their silent judgment, and for the first time, I didn't care. "I think I'll be stepping out," I said calmly, pushing my chair back. "I've got a lot to prepare for." As I stood up, I could hear my father's voice in the background, raising the topic of what I could have achieved if I'd only chosen a traditional career path. But it didn't matter anymore. I was done apologizing for who I was. Before I left, I turned back to face them. "By the way, Neosys Logistics has just surpassed Harrison Logistics in market share. I guess tech isn't as useless as you think." And with that, I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. The call hung in the air like a loud, sudden silence, its weight sinking deep into the pit of my stomach. I looked at the phone in my hand, still trying to process what I had just heard. Neosys Logistics was going to be on the cover of TECH Innovators Weekly, a magazine I had been reading for years, one that showcased the top names in the tech industry. The voice on the other end continued to speak, but I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was reeling, the sudden wave of validation crashing over me. My anonymous little logistics startup, built from nothing, was about to be recognized as one of the most innovative companies in AI-powered logistics. It felt surreal, like the moment should have belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't constantly dismissed by their family as a failure. When I finally found my voice, I managed a shaky, "Thank you, that's amazing." I looked up at my family, all of them staring at me now, their mouths hanging open in shock. My father, who had barely said a word since my arrival, was the first to break the silence. I could see his face turning red, his eyes widening with disbelief. "Wait, you're serious?" he asked, his voice almost shaking. I nodded, still processing. "Yes, Dad, Neosys Logistics is being featured as a cover story." The room went quiet again. My brother Paul looked like he had just been slapped, his jaw going slack. He slowly placed his fork down on his plate, his earlier mockery of my career in tech now gone. His face had drained of color as the implications of the news sank in. "Is this some kind of joke?" Paul asked, his voice tight, struggling to mask his embarrassment. He shot a glance at our father, who was still staring at me, his hands now clenched into fists on the table. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on my shoulders, but I remained calm, steadying my breath. I didn't owe them an explanation, not anymore. "No joke," I said, keeping my voice composed. "Neosys has just surpassed Harrison Logistics in market share." Paul's face paled even further. I saw it. The recognition that the company I had built in silence was the reason Harrison Logistics was struggling. I could see the gears turning in his head as he made the connection. "Wait," my father interrupted, rising abruptly from his seat, his hands shaking. He turned to me, his voice trembling. "How could this happen without us knowing? You've been hiding this from us?" I shrugged, feeling a strange sense of liberation wash over me. "I didn't hide anything. You never really asked, and every time I tried to talk about my business, it was dismissed as unimportant." My mother, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. "The Bennett Foundation. How does that fit into all this?" I glanced at her, surprised by the question. "The Bennett Foundation is an investor, Mom. They've been part of Neosys' success for a while now, but I guess you wouldn't have known that either." The room fell into stunned silence as my family processed the news. The magnitude of what I had accomplished was sinking in, but no one knew what to say. Paul just stared at his plate, his thoughts clearly racing. Dad, still standing, was visibly shaken, unable to process that his daughter, his failure of a daughter in his eyes, had quietly built a billion-dollar business. "You're telling us you've been running a company this successful and we didn't know about it?" Dad's voice was low, almost accusatory, as though he couldn't fathom how he had missed it. I nodded slowly. "You never asked, Dad, and whenever I brought it up, you dismissed it. But I guess it doesn't matter now." My mother looked at me, her brow furrowed. "Isabella, why didn't you tell us? Why keep it a secret?" I swallowed hard, not wanting to show how much the question hurt. "Because every time I tried, you laughed. You told me it was a waste of time, that I should be doing something real." For a moment, the room was completely still. Then my father sat back down, defeated, his face a mix of confusion and shame. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words seemed stuck, as if he realized too late how badly he had treated me. Paul finally spoke, his voice quieter now, almost shaky. So, this this is why Harrison's been losing clients? His tone was almost a whisper, a mix of disbelief and a tinge of jealousy. I nodded again, no longer feeling the need to sugarcoat it. Yes, Paul. Neosys is why Harrison Logistics is struggling. I tried to offer advice to help you modernize your operations, but you never listened. The silence in the room grew heavier. I watched Paul as his mind finally caught up with the facts. His company, the one he had worked so hard to keep afloat, was now being overshadowed by the very thing he had mocked for years. And I could see it in his eyes. The realization that he had dismissed me, his own sister, for something that had quietly grown into a juggernaut. Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. So, the Bennett Foundation then? How big is this company? Thousands of employees. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pride. It was a smile of quiet vindication. Yes, Dad. Thousands. Millions in revenue. Partnerships with companies like FedEx, Amazon, and even some overseas clients. My family remained silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. They were all still trying to process the revelation, still grappling with the truth of what I had achieved, what I had done in spite of them. In that moment, I realized that it didn't matter if they ever understood or accepted me. I had built something for myself, and that was enough. Earlier that evening, I had parked my old car in the farthest spot in the lot, next to my father's gleaming BMW and Paul's brand new Mercedes. The sight made me feel small, the sharp contrast between their sleek, high-end vehicles and my humble, worn-out sedan, making me feel like an outsider in my own family. I didn't belong in their world. Never had, never would. But I showed up anyway, as I always did, dragging my self-doubt behind me like a heavy weight. The hostess greeted me with polite uncertainty as I entered the upscale restaurant. Her glance flicked to my outfit, a simple black blouse and jeans, before her lips parted with a forced smile. It was the same old judgment. I didn't look like I belonged, and she wasn't the first to think that. "Table for Marsh?" she asked, though her tone hinted at disbelief that someone like me could be part of a family like theirs. I nodded, and she led me to the back of the room, guiding me to the table where my parents and Paul sat. As usual, the table was set for perfection. Everything about it screamed wealth and sophistication, from the carefully placed silverware to the low, ambient lighting that hinted at exclusivity. When I took my seat, my father didn't even look up from his menu. He didn't need to. He had already seen me and made his judgment. Paul, on the other hand, gave me a quick once-over and smirked as if he'd won some unspoken competition just by existing in this space. It was a look I knew all too well. "I guess you didn't get the memo," Dad said, finally looking at me with a raised eyebrow. He barely disguised the disapproval in his voice. "We're at a nice place tonight. Do you really think this is appropriate?" I glanced at my outfit, feeling my face flush. I had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it sting any less. It was always the same. I wasn't polished enough for them, not rich enough, not enough in their eyes. "Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe you even made it here looking like that," Paul added, his tone laced with condescension. "I mean, look at us." He gestured to himself, wearing his usual crisp designer suit. "We're here because we've got things figured out. You? Well, it's cute that you're trying, but, not everyone is cut out for tech. It's a bit of a waste, don't you think?" I forced myself to remain calm. I had heard this 1,000 times. Every dinner felt like a test, and I was always the one failing. I could feel my father's eyes on me, waiting for some sort of explanation, as if my choices in life needed to be justified to him. My mom, who hadn't spoken yet, now turned her gaze to me, a concerned look in her eyes. "Isabella," she said softly, almost like she was ashamed of me. "Have you thought about maybe settling down? Buying a house, getting married, starting a family? You're getting older. Don't you think it's time to focus on those things?" I swallowed, fighting to keep my emotions in check. My mother had always assumed that those traditional milestones were the only way to be happy in life. I had tried over and over to explain that I wasn't interested in marriage or buying a house at this point in my life. I had my career, I had Neosys, and that was what fulfilled me, but she could never understand that. "I'm happy, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "My career is my focus right now. I'm doing something that's important, and I'm good at it." She shook her head, giving me a soft, pitying smile. "But honey, that's not enough. You can't just work all the time. Life isn't about work. You need more than that. Paul laughed. Yeah, like a computer job. What exactly are you even doing over there? Typing codes? That's just a hobby, not a real career. You should have been more like me. I run a business, a real one. But I guess that's too boring for someone like you, huh? I bit back the sharp words threatening to escape. Every part of me wanted to shout at them, to tell them how wrong they were about everything, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. It never did. They wouldn't understand. The conversation continued like that, each of them taking turns to dismiss my choices. I could feel the weight of their judgments on my lifestyle, on my career, on everything I had worked for. All they saw was a woman who hadn't done the right things, hadn't followed the path they had laid out for me. I was supposed to be like Paul, managing a business, dressed in expensive suits, surrounded by wealth and status. I wasn't supposed to be building something from the ground up, in a field they couldn't even understand. I felt small, like I didn't matter. But I kept my head up, knowing that none of their words had any truth. My success wasn't measured by their standards. And just as I was about to respond, trying to defend myself once again, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the same number I had seen earlier, the one from TECH Innovators Weekly. I excused myself from the table, stepping away to take the call. When I answered, the voice on the other end was familiar. "Is this Isabella Marsh?" the reporter asked. "Yes, it is," I replied, heart racing. "I'm Jennifer from TECH Innovators Weekly. I'm calling to let you know that your company, Neosys Logistics, has been chosen to be featured on the cover of our upcoming issue. We're excited to share your success with the world." I froze. My mind couldn't keep up with the words. Cover story, Neosys Logistics. My company, recognized as one of the top innovators in the field. I heard the reporter continue, but her words barely registered. I was still trying to grasp the magnitude of it. "Thank you," I finally managed to say. "That's incredible." I turned back to the table, still stunned, and slowly placed my phone down, knowing my family was watching me now. They were waiting, looking for some sign of vulnerability, some proof that they had gotten under my skin, but I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I looked at each of them in turn, my eyes steady. "My company, Neosys, has just been chosen for the cover of TECH Innovators Weekly," I said, my voice calm. "And by the way, we've surpassed Harrison Logistics in market share." The room fell dead silent. My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. Paul just stared at me, his face paling as he connected the dots. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally being seen for who I was. The evening seemed to drag on longer than it ever had before, the tension thickening with every passing minute. My father had returned to his quiet disapproval, poking at his food like it was somehow my fault that the meal didn't taste quite right. Paul, ever the provocateur, had taken the opportunity to mock me further, slinging insult after insult in my direction. By now, the wine was starting to loosen his tongue, and the words came faster, more bitter. "Honestly, Isabella," Paul said with a sly grin, his glass of wine already half empty, "you really think your computer job is ever going to take off? It's a fantasy. It's just like one of those startups that promises the moon and then crashes because it doesn't have anything real behind it." I stared at him, biting the inside of my cheek to keep my calm. The humiliation was starting to sting in places I didn't even know I had. It wasn't that he didn't understand, it was that he didn't want to. It was easier for him to mock what I'd worked so hard for than to try and comprehend how my computer job had taken me places he never could have imagined. "You're still living in that tiny apartment, huh?" he added, his voice now just dripping with condescension. "Maybe you should stop playing with your little tech toys and start focusing on some real milestones in life, like owning a house or, I don't know, getting married?" My father chimed in, his voice lower but no less cutting. "He's right, Isabella. We've been telling you for years, your work's nice, but it's nothing substantial. It doesn't lead to anything. Where's the stability? Where's the future?" I felt the weight of their words on me, and though I wanted to snap, to finally scream at them and tell them they were wrong, I stayed silent. I had learned over the years that there was no point in arguing, not when the very air they breathed was thick with judgment. I knew how this story played out. It was the same every time. My mother, who had been quiet so far, took a sip of her wine before adding, "Isabella, you really need to think about the future. You're not getting any younger. Have you considered what your life will look like in the next 10 years? She paused, then glanced at Paul, her voice softening. You should take some lessons from your brother, sweetie. Look at how he's building his business. Paul is doing everything the right way. Paul's grin widened, and he threw a wink in my direction. The kind of wink that made my stomach turn. It's all about stability, Isabella, he said, his words dripping with a tone that said he was finally getting his moment. If you actually focused on something that lasted, maybe you wouldn't be struggling with your startups and technology and whatnot. But hey, at least I'm not pretending to change the world. I'm making it work. Real work. The words stung more than I wanted them to. My fingers tightened around my glass, my knuckles whitening. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I kept my cool, pushing the words down that screamed to be let out. I had to let them have their moment. They had been doing this for years. They had always believed Paul was the only one who mattered. But tonight, I wasn't going to let them see how much it hurt. As I opened my mouth to respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. At first, I almost ignored it, thinking it was another reminder from work. But then I saw the number, TECH INNOVATORS WEEKLY. My heart skipped a beat. I immediately excused myself from the table, the sounds of my family's conversation fading into the background as I stepped away to answer the call. My hands shook slightly, betraying my calm demeanor. Hello, this is Isabella Marsh. The voice on the other end was smooth and professional. Hi, is this Isabella Marsh? This is Jennifer from TECH INNOVATORS Weekly. I'm calling to confirm that Neosis Logistics has been selected for the cover of our next issue. We're excited to feature your company as one of the top innovators in AI-powered logistics. I froze. The words swam in my head, but it felt like the room was spinning around me. Yes, that's amazing, I said, my voice steady despite the rush of emotion swelling inside me. Thank you. Jennifer continued, explaining a bit more about the article and the upcoming feature, but I barely heard her. I was already too distracted by the weight of the words she had just spoken. Cover story. Neosis Logistics. Top innovators. For a split second, it felt like everything I had quietly worked for, everything I had kept hidden from my family, was finally coming to light. I pulled myself together enough to end the call, my mind still racing. As I turned back toward the table, I saw the shocked faces of my family. They had all gone quiet, their eyes fixed on me, waiting for some kind of reaction. I took a deep breath and walked back to my seat, not giving them the satisfaction of seeing my internal storm. Instead, I looked at each of them in turn, my voice calm but resolute. I just got off the phone with TECH INNOVATORS Weekly, I said, my words slow but firm. Neosis has been chosen for the cover story. And by the way, we've surpassed Harrison Logistics in market share. The silence that followed was deafening. My father stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back in the process. His face was an open book, filled with shock and disbelief. He looked like he had seen a ghost. What did you say? He stammered, looking from me to Paul, who was now pale, his mouth slightly open in shock. I repeated myself, watching as their faces registered the news. I said Neosis has surpassed Harrison Logistics in market share. You've been losing clients to my company, Paul. To Neosis, I let the words sink in, watching as Paul's face slowly drained of color. His smug attitude evaporated, replaced by a mix of confusion and regret. I didn't know, Paul muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. My father stood there, frozen, looking between me and Paul as the weight of the revelation hit him. I could see the struggle in his eyes as he tried to process what this meant for everything he had ever believed about me, about my career. I turned to my mother, who had been silent the entire time, her face a mask of confusion. The Bennett Foundation, Mom. They're investors. They've been involved for a while now, I said, my voice quiet but confident. The room was still, the words hanging in the air, unanswered. My family sat frozen, unable to speak, unable to grasp the scale of what I had quietly accomplished while they had dismissed me. The silence that followed my announcement stretched long enough to make me uncomfortable. My father, still standing, didn't seem to know how to react. His jaw tightened as though he were trying to hold back words that had suddenly lost all their meaning. Paul, on the other hand, looked like he had just been hit with a cold bucket of water. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. I leaned back in my chair, trying to stay composed as I watched their disbelief slowly morph into something else. Embarrassment, perhaps, or shame. After all, they had been mocking me, dismissing my career choices and belittling my work. Now, that very work had taken center stage, and they couldn't quite comprehend how it had all happened without them noticing. Wait! My father's voice finally broke through the silence, his words coming out slow and disbelieving. This, this doesn't make sense. You've been doing this without us knowing? I nodded. Yes, Dad. Neosis has been growing steadily for years, but I never shared it with you. Not when you've always dismissed everything I've worked for. My voice stayed steady, though the weight of his question stung. His disbelief was like a slap, but it was nothing new. I don't get it, he said, his hand rubbing his forehead in confusion. How could you build something like that without us knowing? Without asking for help? I couldn't help but let a small, almost bitter smile slip onto my face. I didn't want your help. Not when every time I tried to talk about it, I was dismissed. You told me it was unimportant and that I should get a real job. Paul, who had remained silent up until now, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He looked at me like he was trying to understand what had just happened, but the realization was slowly dawning on him. So, all this time? His voice faltered. You were running $1 billion business while I was stuck with Harrison Logistics? I watched as his face paled. The expression on his face shifted from disbelief to a dawning, cold realization. The company he had been trying to keep afloat, the company he had poured his pride into, had just been outpaced by his little sister's tech startup. I didn't know, Paul muttered, looking down at his hands. I could hear the unspoken shame in his voice. He had mocked me for so long, dismissing Neosis as nothing more than a computer job or a fantasy, and now he was forced to come face to face with the truth. My father finally sat down, still processing what I had told him. But why didn't you ever tell us? His voice was quieter now, almost pleading. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Why? Because every time I tried, you just laughed. You said I wasn't good enough. You said I was wasting my time. You didn't believe in me. The words hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken frustrations. My mother, who had been quietly listening, now spoke up. I'm confused, she said, her voice filled with genuine confusion. The Bennett Foundation? How are they involved in all of this? I glanced at her, not surprised by the question. She had never asked me about my business before. Her attention had always been focused on the traditional milestones she thought mattered. Buying a house, getting married, having kids. My business, my success. None of it had ever been her focus. The Bennett Foundation has been an investor in Neosis since the early days, I explained, my voice calm. They've helped us grow and expand, just like any major investor would. But you never cared to ask. There was another long pause. The rest of my family processed the magnitude of what I had just revealed, but their minds seemed unable to catch up with the reality of the situation. They had written me off as a failure, a dreamer, a tech geek who would never amount to anything. Now, they had to come to terms with the fact that Neosis, my company, was one of the driving forces in the logistics industry, eclipsing everything they had built. I took a deep breath, letting the silence linger for a moment longer. Neosis isn't just some small startup. We have thousands of employees, multi-million-dollar revenue, and partnerships with major corporations. We've been working with companies like FedEx and Amazon. Our AI-powered logistics systems are changing the way the entire industry works. I watched as my father's face fell, his earlier anger giving way to stunned silence. My mother's hand fluttered to her chest, as though trying to process the enormity of what I was saying. I've been quiet about it because I knew you wouldn't care, I added, my voice quieter now. But this is my success. And you should all know, in case you were wondering, it's real. The words hung in the air like a weight, each of them processing the new reality I had just dropped on them. The family that had dismissed me, who had made me feel small and unimportant, was now sitting in stunned silence, their world shaken by the success they had refused to acknowledge. And there, in that silence, I realized something. It didn't matter if they understood or accepted it. I had proven to myself and to the world that I was capable of achieving something they could never have imagined. The journey I had taken to get here wasn't about their approval. It was about building something that would outlast them all. For the first time, I wasn't the failure they had always painted me to be. I was the success they had ignored. As the evening wore on, I couldn't help but think back to the days when I first started Neosis Logistics. I had been living in a small, rundown apartment, working long hours at my desk, and keeping my success a secret from my family. They had no idea what I was doing. How could they? I never felt like I could share my victories with them. Every time I mentioned my progress, they dismissed it, and that made it clear that they didn't care. I used to drive my old car, a beat-up sedan that had been with me for years, while my father and brother drove their shiny new vehicles. It was hard not to feel like the odd one out, even within my own family. I watched them succeed in their own ways, Paul growing his business and Dad investing in real estate. Meanwhile, I worked silently, building something that I knew was going to be huge but never dared to share, because the minute I did, I was shut down. I remember one time when I tried to help Harrison Logistics, Paul's company. I had offered my expertise in logistics technology, suggesting ways they could modernize their operations and improve efficiency. But Paul wasn't interested. He scoffed at the idea of using new technology, of changing the way things had always been done. "It's not that simple," he said, waving me off. "We're a traditional business, Isabella. We don't need your fancy tech." I could never make them understand how important the future was, how much technology could change things for them. And so, Harrison Logistics continued to run on outdated systems, slowly sinking, while Neosys grew silently in the background. But the truth was, I couldn't just watch them struggle anymore. Sitting at the table that night, I couldn't help but reflect on how much my family had missed out on. Every time I had tried to help, they had shut me down. And now, as I sat across from them, I realized that all of their dismissive comments, everything they had said about my career, had been wrong. I had built something incredible and they had no idea. What made it harder was knowing that even when I had reached out, I had never been taken seriously. I had asked them for their support, and they had turned their backs on me. They'd always acted like they were doing me a favor when they offered their unsolicited advice, but when I actually succeeded, they couldn't even bring themselves to acknowledge it. "Paul," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady, "I offered you help. I tried to tell you that Harrison Logistics needed to modernize, but you didn't want to listen. I turned to my father, and you didn't believe in me either. You were so focused on what you thought was right, you never even gave me a chance." Paul shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable as my words hung in the air. His face had gone pale, and I could see the shame in his eyes. Finally, he opened his mouth. I didn't realize how far behind we were," he admitted. "And I guess I thought you were just trying to, I don't know, push me out. I didn't want to hear it." "And now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Now that you see what's happened, what's your excuse?" My father looked at me with a mixture of regret and confusion. "I should have supported you," he said quietly, his voice filled with guilt. "I should have seen what you were doing. I didn't understand how important it was, and now it's too late." "I've been telling you this for years," I replied, my tone sharp but steady. "But you never cared enough to listen." The weight of it all, the missed opportunities, the isolation I felt, was suddenly too much to bear. I had spent so much time trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. I had sacrificed my own peace for their approval, and for what? A few moments of fleeting recognition? Now that I was sitting here, finally being recognized for my success, the thought of going back and pretending to be someone else seemed unbearable. I had built something on my own, despite their doubts, despite their refusal to acknowledge my potential. Paul, sitting across from me, finally spoke again. "You were right," he said, his voice softer now. "You were right all along. I guess I've been too focused on my own stuff to see it." Dad cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, Isabella," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I should have supported you, seen what you were doing. I should have recognized it earlier." And for the first time, it felt like my father was truly seeing me, not as the failure he had once labeled me, but as someone who had proven herself, someone who had achieved what they never expected. But as much as I wanted to hear their apologies, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too little, too late. The years I had spent being dismissed, shut down, and ignored had taken their toll on me. Still, I could see the regret in their eyes, and for a moment, I allowed myself to soften. "It's okay," I said quietly, meeting my father's gaze. "But you have to understand that this success is mine. It always was." Paul nodded slowly. "I get it. And I don't know how to fix what I've done, but I'll try. I can't change the past, but I'll listen from now on." And in that moment, I knew things could never go back to the way they were. My family might have been late to the party, but at least they were starting to realize who I had become. They were beginning to understand the magnitude of the success I had quietly achieved while they had all been so focused on their own lives. It wasn't the kind of acknowledgement I had wanted when I was younger, but it was something And that, at least, felt like progress. The silence that followed my confession lingered, suffocating the space between us. My father had taken his seat again, but he still couldn't seem to fully process what had just happened. My brother Paul, now pale and defeated, looked like he had just realized the full weight of his earlier dismissiveness. For the first time in my life, I saw him without the smugness, without the layers of arrogance that usually shielded him from feeling anything other than self-assured. The awkward stillness was only broken when Paul cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of control. "So, what now?" he asked, the question tentative and unsure. "What do we do?" I knew this was coming, and part of me had been preparing for it. This moment of reckoning, when Paul would finally see how deeply he had underestimated me, how wrong he had been to mock my work, to dismiss it as a mere hobby. But now, as the weight of the situation bore down on me, it felt like the right moment to offer something. Not just as a sister, but as someone who had built something from the ground up. Something that could save their business if they were willing to listen. "I think it's time we talk about Harrison Logistics," I said slowly, watching them both intently. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, Dad, about how you wish you had supported me. And Paul, about how you don't know where to go from here. Well, I have an idea." Paul's eyes flicked to me, his expression unreadable. "Go on," he said cautiously. I took a breath. "Neosys is growing, and I'm willing to help Harrison Logistics, but it's going to require a big change. I think we can merge the two companies." Paul furrowed his brow. "Merge? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Neosys acquiring Harrison Logistics," I explained. "It's not just about saving your company, Paul. It's about giving it a chance to evolve, modernize. I've seen the way Harrison operates, and frankly, it's outdated. The tech, the logistics, none of it's where it needs to be. But it could be. It can be." My father shifted in his seat, a skeptical look crossing his face. "You want Neosys to buy us out?" "Isabella, I don't know if that's wise. That's a huge step." I shook my head. "It's not about the money. It's about the future. Harrison Logistics can't survive if it doesn't adapt to new technology. It's already behind, and if we don't embrace change, we're just going to watch it sink." Paul leaned forward, his hands clenched around his glass, as though the idea was sinking in. "You really think we can make it work?" His voice was tentative, almost pleading. "I do," I said firmly. "But here's the deal. I want to help, but it'll come with conditions. You'll have to start at the bottom, Paul. I'm not giving you a free pass just because you're my brother. You'll start in an entry-level position, and you'll earn your way up. You'll work under me, and you'll prove you can adapt to the new technology. No shortcuts. You'll have to show that you can keep up with the demands of modern logistics." The silence that followed was heavy. Paul's face was a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. I could see that he was struggling with the idea. He had always thought of himself as the leader, the one with the power. This offer, though, required him to swallow his pride. "And what about me?" My father's voice cut through the silence, trembling slightly. "What's my role in all of this?" "You'll have to step back," I said, my voice steady, though there was a part of me that wanted to say more. "You've done your part. But you've pushed too hard for tradition, and now you need to embrace what's new. You'll need to let me lead this, Dad. If we're going to make this work, you'll have to let go of control." My father's face tightened at the suggestion, but I saw something shift in his expression. Regret, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "I see," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I was holding on to the past. Maybe it's time to let go." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment when everything could change. When my family, for the first time, might finally realize that they weren't above the world I had built, that they needed me as much as I had needed them, just without the judgment and dismissiveness that had always been present. "And one more thing," I added, meeting my father's gaze. "Respect. If you want me to help, if you want to rebuild our relationship, it has to be on my terms. I'm not going to be the person I used to be for you. I'm done pretending to be something I'm not." My mother, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, looked at me with wide eyes. There was a flash of gratitude in her expression, mixed with something else, something I couldn't quite place. "I understand," she said softly. I'm sorry. I should have supported you more." I nodded, but I didn't let myself feel the weight of their apologies too deeply. This was the beginning of something new, not a moment for nostalgia. We're all going to have to work for this, I said, standing up. But it's possible. We can do this together. But it won't work if we don't change. All of us. As I walked out of the restaurant that night, I could feel the weight of the conversation hanging between us. Things had shifted. My family, for the first time, was willing to consider what I had been telling them all along. And maybe, just maybe, I could help them find a way forward. But only if they were willing to listen. The morning after the dinner, the article in TECH Innovators Weekly went live. I'd seen the headline earlier that day, and my stomach fluttered with a mixture of pride and apprehension. Neosys Logistics had finally been recognized in the way I always dreamed of. Publicly, proudly, for all to see. But there was a bitter edge to the victory. It wasn't just about the recognition anymore, it was about everything my family hadn't understood and, frankly, hadn't seen coming. By midday, the emails and phone calls started pouring in. The article had spread faster than I expected. My inbox flooded with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were congratulatory, others curious, and a few were nothing short of opportunistic. But my family's reaction was what lingered in my mind. I had been bracing for their humiliation, for the awkwardness of acknowledging how wrong they had been. But when I finally checked my phone for messages from them, I saw something different. My father had sent a single text. "Proud of you, we were wrong." A simple sentence. Maybe not the apology I wanted, but it was the first step in a direction I hadn't dared hope for. Paul had sent a message as well. "I can't believe it. I owe you an apology. I didn't get it before, but I'm starting to see it now. Thank you for helping us." My heart skipped. I didn't expect him to admit it so easily. I opened the message from my mother next. "I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'm proud of you, Isa. But can we talk soon?" The three of them had never been the type to apologize. This felt like a shift, one that I wasn't sure I was ready to fully accept, but I knew it was only the beginning. A few hours later, my father called. His voice was different than it had been the night before, less sharp, softer, almost regretful. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, the hesitation clear in his voice, "about everything, about how I treated you and what you've built. I was wrong, Isabella. I was wrong to push you into that mold. I should have seen you for what you are, the person who was always capable of more than we ever let you show." I didn't know how to respond. There was a part of me that wanted to hear more, wanted to hear the full apology, but I knew that wasn't his style. This, in its own way, was more than I had expected. "I'm not mad anymore," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "But you have to know that I'm not doing this for you. I'm not doing it to prove myself to you. I'm doing it because this is what I'm meant to do. What I've been doing all along." "I get it," he said, a sigh escaping his lips. "I do. And I respect you for it." But respect, true respect, wasn't something that could be earned in a few words. It had to be built over time, through actions. I knew that. And though this conversation felt like a breakthrough, it also felt like the start of something far more complicated. Later that afternoon, Paul and I sat down over a coffee at my apartment. He looked at me with an expression that was both hesitant and reflective. His usual confidence was gone. He seemed almost vulnerable. "I know I've been a jerk," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I'm trying to learn. I've always been the one who had it figured out, but you, what you've done with Neosys, it's impressive. It's more than I ever gave you credit for." I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "It wasn't just me, Paul. It's been a team effort. I might have built it, but it's not just mine to take credit for." He glanced at me with a faint smile. "Maybe that's why it's been so successful. You're not out here acting like it's all about you." I smiled back, but it was bittersweet. "I think you'll come to see that success doesn't come from pretending you have all the answers. It comes from being willing to listen, to change." He was silent for a moment before speaking again, this time with more conviction. "I want to learn. I want to do this differently. I don't want to be the guy who's stuck in the past, pretending I can do it all on my own." I could tell that he meant it, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope, that maybe, just maybe, we could start rebuilding something together, not just as family, but as two business partners with something to offer each other. "It's going to take time," I warned him, "and you'll have to prove it, not to me, but to the people you work with, and more importantly, to yourself." "I know," he replied quietly, "but I'm ready." After a pause, I spoke again, more seriously. There's a lot of work to be done if we're going to fix Harrison Logistics, but I'm willing to help if you're ready to put in the work. Paul nodded, the weight of the commitment starting to sink in. I am. I could feel the air between us shift, just a little. The past might never fully be behind us, but there was a chance, at least, for us to move forward, together. As I hung up the phone that evening, I couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet pride. Things were far from perfect, and the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like my family was on the verge of understanding me, not just as a daughter, but as a person who had forged her own path. Despite the odds, I wasn't doing this to prove them wrong anymore. I was doing this to prove to myself that my journey, my way, had been worth every sacrifice. And as much as my family had struggled to see it, they were beginning to see the possibilities too. Tomorrow, I would continue to fight for that future, not just for Neosis, but for a family that was finally beginning to see me for who I was. The bright lights of Neosis Logistics headquarters buzzed around me as I stood in front of the sleek glass building, the scent of fresh coffee and success hanging in the air. Today was different. The family photo shoot I had agreed to was a necessary step forward, not just for my company, but for the fractured relationships I had spent years trying to navigate. It felt like a small victory, one that I wasn't sure I could have ever imagined when I first started Neosis. I had made my peace with how my family had treated me over the years. They had doubted me, dismissed my work, and belittled my achievements. But now, for the first time, they were here, at my company's headquarters, standing in the very place where I had built everything that mattered to me. This photo shoot wasn't just about capturing a moment of public acknowledgement. It was about embracing the person I had become, one that they were finally willing to see and appreciate. As the photographer adjusted the lights, I glanced over at my family. My father, Paul, and my mother were all dressed in their best clothes, but they weren't the polished versions of themselves they had once been. There was no smugness in my father's eyes anymore, no sarcasm in Paul's demeanor. Even my mother, who had always seemed to float just above reality, had an air of genuine pride in her stance. For a brief moment, I wondered if they felt it, what it meant to finally see the truth, to see how far I had come without them. They had once thought my path was a mistake, but here they were, standing in the reflection of my success. Isabella, could you step forward a bit, please? The photographer called, snapping me out of my thoughts. I moved into position, positioning myself between my father and Paul, but the emotional weight of the moment settled in my chest. My father had always been the type to keep his emotions locked behind a wall, but today I could see something different in his eyes. He turned to me, his expression softened, and his voice, usually commanding, was quieter, almost hesitant. I'm proud of you, Isabella. I know I've said it before, but I never really understood what you were doing. I should have supported you more. You've proven me wrong. His words hung in the air between us, but they weren't just words. I could see the regret in his eyes, the slow recognition of how much I had accomplished without their help. My father, who had once dismissed my every move, was admitting something I never thought I'd hear from him. I nodded, my throat tightening. It's okay, Dad. You didn't know, but I've always known what I was capable of. I just needed to prove it to myself. He nodded in return, his gaze shifting to Paul. I should have listened, he said, his voice almost regretful. And I'm sorry I didn't. Paul, who had been standing there, awkwardly shifting on his feet, finally broke his silence. I didn't get it, he said, his voice low, filled with the weight of his realization. I didn't see it before, but I do now. I was so focused on trying to hold on to what I thought was the right way that I completely ignored what you were doing. I should have been proud of you. I could feel the sincerity in his words. The tension that had always existed between us was starting to unravel, thread by thread. It's not just about being proud, Paul, I said gently. It's about seeing the value in what others are doing, even if it's different from what you expected. He met my eyes, nodding slowly. I get it now, and I'm sorry for not seeing that before. You've built something incredible. The photographer, sensing the emotional moment, quietly snapped a few pictures, capturing the subtle shift in the room. The moment when my family finally saw me, not as the rebellious daughter who had chosen an unconventional path, but as a successful entrepreneur who had earned her place in the world. When the shoot wrapped up, we all moved to the lounge area for a break. My father, who had been quiet for the most part, suddenly placed a hand on my shoulder. Isabella, I don't know what it took to get here, But I've learned that success doesn't always look the way we expect it to. And you've shown me that. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about understanding that they were finally seeing me for who I was, and that more than anything was enough. We shared a moment of silence before Paul spoke up again, his voice softer than usual. So, what's next? I smiled at him. Next? We make sure Neosis and Harrison work together. We modernize everything and we build something even bigger. Paul raised an eyebrow. You mean you'd let me learn from you? I met his gaze, knowing what he was asking. If you're willing to work for it, I'm not just handing you a free pass, but if you're serious about this, I'll help you. My father looked between us, then nodded. That sounds like the right approach. We've got to change the way we've been doing things. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of closure, not just with the work I had built, but with my family. We had come a long way since that first dinner, that first night of judgment. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I was no longer hiding my success. I wasn't going to shrink myself to fit into their mold anymore. As the photographer wrapped up the final shots, I looked at my family, my father, Paul, and my mother, and felt a quiet pride settle within me. This was it. This was my moment. And for the first time in my life, I was standing here, completely whole, not just as their daughter, but as the woman who had built something that could change the world. The future was no longer about their expectations. It was about mine, and it was time to embrace it fully.